All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome today to the Hope Matrix. I am super grateful to have you here, have you listening in. I have a fantastic guest today who I'm super excited to introduce you to. He has got such varied experience. He has a PhD from Stanford. He's worked with NASA, if I've got that right. His name is Zachary Burton, and he's also got a play he wrote that he's going to talk to us a little bit more about. He is living with bipolar, and he's going to share a little bit more about that as well. And we're going to look at it through the lens of hope. Again, just to kind of give that brief overview of the 5 keys to hope that we talk about. It's first identifying and recognizing that stress response. It is practicing your 5 keys for happiness, or practicing your happiness habits, the things that keep you in that, what we call with young kids, that upper brain. It is taking inspired action using SMART goals, creating a strong network for hope, and then finally overcoming some common challenges to hopelessness. So super excited to have Zachary here to help us kind of look at all of these things about hope through the lens of living with bipolar and some of the challenges associated with that, and really how to use it for your advantage, I think. So welcome, long intro. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathryn. It's just terrific to be here speaking with you. So many components of what you're doing within this hope framework, resonate so deeply. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So, your background is so diverse and varied. How did you get, NASA to, mental health, to all of these different areas? Can you just tell me a little bit more about yourself? And yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It surprises me day to day to reflect on, my path. I'm sure that's true of all of us. We never know. But yeah, so I started, originally by training through undergrad, and then my PhD as a geologist, so as an earth scientist. And that was how, sort of related to my involvement both within the energy space and then within the space with NASA and with another institution focused on space research. So that's sort of what I would describe as, sort of like a day job in some regards is science. And recently I started as a scientific consultant for an engineering and consulting firm. So that's sort of that facet of my life. Then, as you mentioned, I live with bipolar disorder, and that all culminated in actually during my PhD at Stanford, which I just finished 2 months ago. But in May of 2017, I had my first psychotic break, and that was basically the culmination of a period of months-long mania, sort of this heightened state, I would call it. And after that psychotic break, which was in the early morning of May 8th, 2017, I was hospitalized for a couple of weeks and sort of completely debilitated for months and months afterward. And so that sort of set the stage for my own mental health journey. I also have a family history of very close loved ones who live with bipolar disorder or who did live with bipolar disorder. So in the wake of my diagnosis while at Stanford, my then partner and I, Elisa Hoffmeister, she's now a medical student at the University of Minnesota, we were reflecting on the fact that there were so few stories of hope. When we talk about hope, when we're in these moments, this sort of depth of despair and uncertainty, as we were just chatting about before we went on air, it's just so necessary to have these hopeful messages, these uplifting messages, alongside also confronting with some of the truths that as a society we need to face, being that mental health needs to be addressed, depression, anxiety, conditions like bipolar and schizophrenia. And similarly, the sort of stigma around that was really what Elisa and I sort of fixed onto, because it was sort of this realization that a lot of this silence and sort of lack of hope and lack of people speaking out was due to this tremendous stigma that mental health and mental health conditions still are subjected to in society. And so that sort of set the stage for my journey in the mental health space, the very beginnings. I can delve into where we're at now, but that sort of sets the stage.
Yeah, no, that's really very helpful, and hearing your story and experience. And I think, the reason I created this podcast is really to look at specific experiences people have and how you apply a hopeful mindset. And again, the first key, getting out of that despair. So how did you, when you were diagnosed and in hospitalized, and, the two components of hopelessness are despair and helplessness. And I would imagine, like,
Yeah.
incredibly,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Spot on. Yeah.
So what is the
Utter despair,
first?
hopelessness. Um,
Exactly. What are some tools, like what helped you get out of, I mean, the first thing we teach our kids too is feeling those feelings, the
yeah.
sadness, the pain, and oftentimes we escape. So we run from them, and that leads to greater, problems like addiction and violence and all of these things.
Yeah.
How were you able to dive deep into, your pain?
Totally. I mean what you say is spot on as far as being just thrust into this pit of despair and uncertainty and like you said, just this utter feel of hopelessness and being sort of out of control of my own life and my own being, which is a really strange experience. Sort of being, it was this feeling early on of being robbed completely of my identity and suddenly not knowing anymore. Really who I was in the world. It sounds sort of dramatic, but really that was the experience. I often talk about it as this crisis of confidence where, I felt I was completely, my ability to function both in a personal life but also in the professional realm was just shattered. It was just gone like that. And so I think as far as what was important to me in confronting and thinking about that, I mean, one was time. It didn't, this sort of transformation, and sort of climbing out of some of those feelings and that feeling of helplessness, definitely didn't happen overnight as a process. But I think it's so critical to me. It's some things I was fortunate to have where, basically a tremendous support network. So both family, at the time, a loving partner as well, very close friends, and then also a very supportive boss who's my PhD advisor, extremely supportive work environment alongside the personal environment. And, I think I've mentioned before in some of your other podcasts is this Hope Network. And so I think for me, that Hope Network, those key people, really were life saving, in escaping and then sort of accepting my condition. There was a lot of pushback on my part. I went off my meds, had another psychotic break, wasn't hospitalized, thanks to having that support network. But there was a lot of confrontation, on my own part with this label, this scary diagnosis that again is really stigmatized. And oh my gosh, look at that crazy person, look at that psycho, look at that, whatever sort of horrible, stigmatized word you want to affix to it. That was a lot to deal with. And then, another sort of interesting facet was, there's sort of that negative component of my sort of mental health diagnosis that I was, or perceived negative component I was confronting with, but also this idea that, oh, wow, if I'm on meds and I'm no longer manic again, I won't be able to ever do anything. I won't be able to achieve anything. I'm only at Stanford because I was manic. All of my accomplishments were just because of this manic state, which, really isn't me. It was just this, condition. And so there was a lot to sort of climb out of there.
Yeah, gosh, that's such an
Yeah.
amazing, it's such an important point too. I mean, a lot of people think they have to take these substances to get to that mania, and if they don't have that, they can't.
Yeah.
And yet it is pretty amazing. And for my, like, I've been sober a long time, and being sober, like without those substances, I couldn't create, and it creates in different ways, but yet, being present, you're doing what you're meant to do. And
Thank you.
so keeping you healthy on the road, to doing that
Absolutely.
is
Yeah.
so critical. Yeah. So in terms of that despair, so you got therapy, and medication and you were hospitalized, did you
Yeah.
take on any practices like meditation? Like, is that something you explored or?
Yeah, you know what's actually sort of funny, I think, is that I was really exploring mindfulness, some components of meditation, um, prior to my psychotic break. So in early 2017, and my psychotic break was May. And a lot of that actually was thanks to my younger brother, who still he meditates up to 2 hours a day these days, practices mindfulness intensively, and is really helpful for him in his own life, and for staying grounded. And so I was just so inspired, back in 2017, I would have been 24 and he was 22, 21 at the time, to see sort of this transformation for him. Because, his own journey was going from this state of being unhappy in school, being like president of a fraternity at a giant state school, sort of super popular, you could say on top of the world for some. And so for him, he had this incredible transformation from that life into, sort of finding much more meaning. And so that inspired me prior to my own experience with mental health conditions and diagnosis. And I think these days, for me, some of those practices aren't as explicit. I don't like sit down and go through sort of the motions of gratitude exercises, other mindfulness practices, of sort of reinforcement of positive thoughts. But all of those, I think, are sort of can be tremendous tools for some people, and for me, have almost become internalized. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. As far as those practices, supplementing, medications is sort of a baseline. These days, I don't really do much therapy, but have family members who gain so much value out of therapy as well. So I think, as you said, it's this big combination, and for all of us, it varies, as far as what's most helpful in recovery and sustaining that sort of hopeful state.
Yeah. And do you know what your triggers are? Like what triggers you into different
Yeah.
states and how you manage them?
Yeah, there are a few, and a few I was only sort of clued into because of my experience with this manic episode, psychosis, sort of again speaking with doctors, in the wake of that, speaking with therapists, psychiatrists, family members who notice things. I'm always amazed by how much more observant friends and family members are of myself, than I am. And so I think, something I'm really, really thankful for, actually, in having experienced, in having experienced what I did, is becoming a lot more aware, sort of who I am, to include like certain triggers. And so I don't know, what comes to mind is sort of more generic triggers that to me aren't always true. Like, a big one for me is sort of can be lack of sleep. But I say this, and these days I sleep anywhere from 2 to 7 hours a night. So it's that I've sort of managed as well. But I very much do notice, for instance, sometimes what I experience is like some sort of paranoia may set in on rare occasions. And for me, that is a clear sign that I'm sort of feeling a bit out of myself, unsettled, uneasy. I would say paranoia / anxiety. And so when that happens, it's a good clue for me to get more sleep. Sometimes take some of my, I think they're called PRNs, but basically as needed medication that I don't take all the time. Take a bit of that, which also makes me sleep like 14 hours.
Yeah.
So definitely, there's not a big suite for me of specific triggers right now, but definitely have really increased my awareness, of sort of my mind state. So yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing. And sleep is so, that's so much in the
totally.
literature and for me personally, is so important. And
Yeah.
if I don't sleep, look out,
Oh my
world.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, also,
It's,
yeah, also
and
with
it,
sleep too. Sorry.
yeah, no, I'm just saying it's hard to want to do so much and have so many, to be so
Oh,
brilliant and want to, and to like get our sleep. So it's really,
it's this tough balance. Right? I would always
I
hear, like,
know.
when I was in Silicon Valley, of like, how can we optimize, the minimal amount of sleep for the most productivity, most hours work. Yeah, so
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Wow. And what do you do to stay like healthy and happy? And I mean, do you work out? Do you like what kind of practices? Do you watch what you eat? Do you?
Yeah, eating, sort of eating healthily is important to me. That's it's not something I'm, like, I would say, sort of super stringent about at all. But I would say my habits before my experience were worse. I was sort of infamous for eating just frozen pizza and frozen burritos that I would scrounge from free grad school events and just survive off of these for months at a time. But these days, much better. I sort of worshipped cabbage salads. It's a strange thing, but then just in general, relatively healthy eating. But I, of course, like, also enjoy a good, like, hamburger here and there. I'm not at all very stringent about it, but I would say overall healthy. Probably too much coffee, but yeah, I mean, as far as these habits, some others, that you mentioned, in sort of this hope framework, is thinking about things like, art, as sort of manifestation. We can talk about that because that, of course, relates to the play, and a lot of my other interests. But another that you had mentioned in the framework that so much of my hopefulness and satisfaction and meaning derives from is volunteering. And so, as far as my involvement with mental health, I mean, it's all volunteer. And so it's sort of, I mean, it occupies more hours than any paid job I've ever had, far more. But at the end of the day, it is all volunteer. And to me, it truly does feel, literally has me sort of ecstatic and eager to wake up the next day after 3 or 4 hours is really this feeling of meaning and excitement around contributing to something that matters in the broader spectrum of things. So
Yeah, no, so important. And I'm so excited to talk to you about this play. I think it's a great
yeah,
segue to get in that, to learn about what it is and what you're
totally.
doing. Yeah, I'm so excited. So can you share more about that?
Totally. Yeah. So I sort of set the stage with my own experience, no pun intended. But basically, in the wake of that experience in summer 2017, which is, super difficult for me, but I'll note that, I think in many ways it was way more difficult for Elisa in the time and family members and friends, because I wasn't aware. I was sort of out of myself in that point, like totally, like it. If you talk to sort of my friends, Elisa, family members, they'll say it was obvious, like it was as if my personality had just been stripped for a number of months. It was almost, at some points, the doctors, sort of would describe, when I was in the hospital or outside, really as catatonic. Really sort of a strange experience there. But I think, again, sort of what we're talking about, this lack of hopeful stories, a lot of sort of the darkness that surrounds these sort of mental health conditions, these sort of tragic and difficult and dark stories available on the internet, sort of readily on the internet. That was part of the inspiration for Elisa and myself, was to both provide some more hopeful stories, but also just really provide a better representation of the true diversity of experiences that people have with mental health, whether it's a diagnosed condition or not. And so basically, a year after, in the summer of 2018, I came to Elisa and all I had was the name. I was like, we should do the Manic Monologues. And she was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we ran with it, which I'll use the word, I don't often, but I'll use the word, it was crazy. And neither of us, of course, here I was, an earth scientist, and she was a pre-med student at the time. And so neither of us had any experience with theater. I had, like, acted in a couple minor roles in high school poorly. And so really we were like total newbies, right? It was this ridiculous sort of undertaking. But then basically in the fall of 2018, we attended a NAMI event. You know, NAMI has a ton of these awesome awareness events. Met a couple folks, two professors actually, who ended up being very close advisors of ours and incredibly close friends to this day. And it sort of was, you know, started to build and take off from there. And so really, you know, the motivation in doing the Manic Monologues was to create a play that showcased diverse, true experiences of mental health conditions to break down stigma. That's sort of the whole mission, is to disrupt stigma surrounding mental health. And so in many ways, we were very much inspired, of course, by the Vagina Monologues, you know, which is done just such a tremendous amount to destigmatize female sexuality, remove the taboo around female sexuality, and also to end violence, to end sexual violence toward women. And so that was a huge inspiration. There were a few examples too of sort of hopeful stories. One organization that really inspires me as well is This Is My Brave. And so their founder, Jennifer, we actually spoke the other week. Finally, we sort of finally connected. And they do basically, they empower individuals and communities to get up on stage, sort of like the Moth or something like this, and share their stories live. Sort of tremendous empowerment there, also in theatrical form. And so for us, what we did, you know, sort of instead as an adaptation was sort of more like what Eve Ensler did with the Vagina Monologues, where we collected stories from across the country, across Canada, a few, you know, outside of North America, and put together, you know, end of the day, 20 stories of all sorts of different diagnoses: bipolar, depression, anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, OCD, really trying to capture that diversity, and from a large variety of people. So people with conditions like myself, but also, you know, say a mother, you know, or a son of someone with a mental health condition. You know, in some cases, a mental health care professional talking about patients, but also their own experience. And so, you know, that was sort of the basis for this play. And to sort of not be long-winded about that, which I already am, but it's just, I don't know, it's so exciting on me to reflect and think on where we're going. But we premiered the play at Stanford in May of 2019, and were truly blown away, because this was, you know, after us scrambling, you know, Elisa directing, running rehearsals, me sort of sitting in, providing pointers, Elisa and I throwing all these printed out stories we had received through Gmail on the kitchen floor in Palo Alto, marking them up with a red pen, sorting them, me figuring out how to book like a 200-person theater, running all our marketing, reaching out to journalists, reaching out. Just as tremendous. You know, we flew in someone from Vancouver in Canada. We flew in someone from Salt Lake City. And so to reflect on it, I'm like, how did it come together?
Yeah.
It just blows my mind, you know. And so we premiered the show 3 nights, completely sold out, 600 people basically attended, and just tremendous reception. You know, there's coverage by Washington Post, NPR, what have you, for the first performance, but sort of the most meaningful was audience members coming up afterward. And those moments like stick with me and will forever. And I mean, one was just having my PhD advisor, who's one of the 7 deans at Stanford now, come up to me afterward, and it was the only time I've ever seen him cry, but he had just tears in his eyes. And so it could have never anticipated, you know, that reception. And, you know, one thing that we were sort of shared during that performance, you know, in introducing the performance was, you know, it looks like Silicon Valley, it looks like the world is ready for these conversations. So. And it's just
Yeah.
taken off from there. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, so powerful. I mean, those human
Mhm.
connections and human stories. It's
Oh my
uh,
gosh, yeah.
yeah,
There's nothing like it. The
yeah.
human element, humanization and empathy, and just
Mhm.
art as well, and narrative storytelling. So yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about it too that, we just talked about earlier, before we got on, I come at this mental health and very business oriented, and I think how can we have the biggest impact for the smallest amount of funds because we're so limited in funding.
Oh,
And I
totally.
love that you created it in a way that other people can use and adopt in their own city and run
Yeah.
with. And so can you tell me a little bit more about how that works?
Oh, I love that you brought that up because, as you said, there's this huge dearth of funding for mental health. Part of my involvement now is working on, actually is a working group I'm a part of on financing global mental health, and so, as you said, yeah, just such a gap. And so for us, with the Manic Monologues, another part of what was just so kind of wild for me to reflect on is that it was all bootstrapped, so to speak. So it was all done. We applied for funding through Stanford, through some others. We sort of sought out funding. Nothing. Sort of all rejected.
Rejected,
Like
I know.
we.
Hope too, yeah.
Oh my gosh, we also sought out like partner organizations, just simply student theater groups on campus, which you would think would be sort of happy to take part, but understandably they have their own season, their own shows, and who are these two, like, geologist and medical student? So so no support there, which I can't blame people as well, because, like, being sort of newcomers, unproven. Sure, I
Yeah.
guess,
Right, right.
and and so, for us, basically going through that, we were like, wow, like, this is possible for people with no theater experience. This is possible for storytellers with no acting experience. This is possible for people with no money. This is possible for people without this tremendous social media PR team, possible for people without strong, like, community partnerships and being able to pull strings. This is possible for anyone. And I think it's totally intimidating, and I've spoken to people since who've been interested in bringing the show and bringing a cast to their organization. And I get that, because it's intimidating. Like, who am I to put on a play, right? Could be the thought. And so part of what the mission is with the Manic Monologues is to show people, like, you can do this. Like, this doesn't have to be Broadway. This isn't Broadway, in most situations. And so that's just sort of a core component, is increasing access to these stories, but also showing people and hopefully empowering them to put on these stories themselves, to host these stories in their communities. And so, as far as how people can bring the stories, basically get in touch, and I like to take, I know in some cases, with sort of traditional plays or playwriting, a playwright will have their play sold through an agency, and then it's kind of good luck to the production team, the director. But I really enjoy sort of interacting with people who are keen to put on these stories, and so oftentimes I'm just sort of available via email, Zoom, to help people think through, like, how they're going to put these stories on, how they're going to adapt them. So this is meant to be, I mean, the Manic Monologues, it's meant to be sort of all of our experiences. It's meant to be for all of us. So yeah, that's the whole
So
point.
cool.
So
Yeah, I love that so much.
um,
And so are the scripts online? I mean, can people access the scripts or how does that work?
basically they get in touch with us,
Yeah.
and then we work together. We provide the script, may provide guidance, but in some cases not. There's a virtual performance actually coming up in April at a community college in Maryland, and so in that case we interacted a bit. I interacted with one of the professors there and basically gave her the script, and at this point they're working on the production. So it can
Wow.
be anything like that, to sort of hands off, to very hands-on, working together. So it's
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
totally.
so cool. I'm sure it's going to be really amazing for you to watch all the people
Oh
all
my
over
gosh.
then, adopting it. So cool.
That yeah, I love that component of, as you said, stories, is with this sort of thing, like every new presentation takes on a life of its own. And I also like to think of like, wow, the people who submitted their stories, like now their stories are being honored. Their stories are being showcased and highlighted, in theory, eventually across the world by incredibly different, but incredibly similar individuals all over the world. So, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. Wow, this has been really wonderful. I do want to touch on just a couple more things, and we'll put the links to how they get in touch with you in the kind of
Totally.
summary. Um,
Yeah.
so we've talked about a little bit about inspired actions, and I think you've given us some good examples of that, and creating a strong network and the importance of a
Oh, yeah.
network. I mean, so key. Can you, any advice for someone that feels really alone right now, that doesn't know who to turn to, that like where?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that maybe that question has never been more important than, now during the pandemic, being virtual, sort of lacking person to person contact. And so I think that, I mean, it's already sort of being covered, research is coming out, people are sort of talking about this, unfortunately, sort of very heightened burden of the pandemic, increasing social isolation, depression, anxiety related to that. And so I try to think, it's hard screen, like sort of talking on screen, but what I've found in my own experience, that's sort of all I can really speak to there, is the isolation has been difficult. I was lucky to have roommates through 2020, and then now actually living with my younger brother and mom. So again, that connection in person. But I've also found, somehow, even though it's still on screen on Zoom, I've really gained so much meaning through connecting with people literally across the world during the pandemic through, Zoom, Google Meets, whatever, phone. The sort of silver lining is I've been doing that way more than before the pandemic. And I've found that I've started working with some new organizations in the mental health space too, whether in the US or in Kenya or the UK, two examples. And I found that it's almost a bit easier, a bit more accessible to get involved with others who are also passionate about things. And I think that for me, at least, that's very important for my own support, is support via sort of like common causes, volunteering, working together, and sort of getting to know each other, becoming both friends and colleagues. So that would be my bid on that. But I also want to grant that it is very difficult during these times. And so that's why I love, trying to spread messages of hope that certainly the pandemic is way, way less than ideal. But I do hope, or am hopeful, that there are some ways to still connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. Do you have any current challenges to your hope?
Yeah, one is funding for mental health. I'm also very hopeful there. I mean, if you look at sort of national budgets, as far as spending that is allocated towards mental health services within even just, the pot that is allocated to health, it's
Yeah,
minimal, as you
isn't it?
said.
Yeah,
Um,
ridiculous.
and so that's tough, right? Because as you said, like that, sort of both the support of private enterprise, private business, as well as government support, sort of public expenditure is a critical piece of this recipe, alongside more grassroots activity. And so at times, that's a challenge, but I'm also hopeful, and things are being done, for increased spending by, private and sort of public sector, governmental sector.
Yeah.
That's an example. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, those that live with bipolar are, I mean, really some of the most brilliant, innovative, creative people in the world. And so it's so important to me that, we either use that energy for self-destruction or harm or for creative brilliance. And so you sharing your story and like sharing strategies with others that are listening on how to really channel that energy for good and for the power of good and care for
Yeah,
self is, yeah, so important. So I'm so
totally.
thankful, yeah, to you for
Thank you. Yeah.
joining us and for the work you're doing in the world and for taking care of yourself and for showing up every day.
Thank you so much. I mean, yeah, as you said, it's I think with mental health in general, diagnosed or not, it's a spectrum. And
Yeah.
so each of our experiences are unique and also very similar to someone across the world or next door. This belongs to all of us. As I often hear people say, it's an equal opportunity part of the human condition. It affects all of us. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Is it Zach or Zachary? Do you prefer?
Zach is perfect. I mean, Doctor Zachary Burton.
Okay, got it.
One
Yes.
is sure one. That's one
Yeah.
face, but no, it's
Yeah,
Zach.
no. I love it. Yeah, and you just said you just recently finished your PhD, so I will
In
call you
December.
Dr. Zachary Burton. Congratulations. That's so
Thank you. Yeah,
amazing.
Dr. Zach
Yeah,
works. That's sort of what
I love it.
I. It's like the
Yeah.
Doctor Oz, but Doctor Z or something like
Oh,
that.
yeah,
There's
I
some
like
similarities.
that. Although it's not actual quotations because it's real.
That's
I've
true.
met doctors that call themselves with the quotations
Oh,
because
that's a
it's
good point.
hilarious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Well, it's been so fun talking to you and I'm really grateful. Some really good
Um,
advice and I can't wait to see the play and share it with others and yeah, explore
Absolutely. Yeah.
that further.
February 18th is the big virtual premiere. I didn't even
Okay,
talk about that,
perfect.
but February
Yeah.
18th. And that's
February
free for
18th.
everyone.
Okay, cool. We'll put a link on all our
Yeah.
social media channels so anyone can view it anywhere around the world free.
Oh, anyone with an internet connection,
Yeah.
free starting February 18th and then onward from that. And
Oh.
I'm just stunned. This has been in the works since August 2019. This will be full Hollywood Broadway cast through a
Mm.
nonprofit theater and dear friends at McCarter Theater. So I'm floored. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Oh
I've
my
been on the edge of
gosh.
my seat for months. So yeah, it's
Wow. That's great.
so excited. And
Yeah.
like you said, providing access. I think that's the silver lining in the virtual world is access. But also,
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for what you do. It was tremendous to read through, some of the frameworks, breaking down both the science of hope and also strategies, these proactive strategies and empowerment that people can take on. So thank you as well for having me. This has really been
Oh,
wonderful.
yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks so much. And we'll put the links in the bio and description. The Manic
The Manic Monologues, no
Monologues,
worries.
the Manic Monologues. Is that the
Yeah.
website, Manic Monologues or
Yeah, the website is themanicmonologues.org.
.org? Okay, yeah, we'll put a link to it. But super excited. Can't wait to see it. And everyone should watch it and then get inspired to bring it to their towns and communities.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a great
Thank
day.
you. You
Yeah.
too.
All right.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good day. Thanks for listening.